So welcome to the month of July. The month of July is here. One of the things I know about July is that it's going to be hot. It is always going to be hot in July. You know, it reminds me of a story that happened one July. It was actually on the 4th of July, several years ago. There were these three really good friends, and they happened to be all people of the cloth. They were all spiritual leaders, and one was a minister, one was a priest, and one was a rabbi. And they were from a very small town. And so to get away from the festivities of the day, you know, small towns go big on 4th of July, they decided to go for a hike. And as I said, it was a very hot day. So on their hike, they came upon a small lake, and they were sweating and they were exhausted. They decided, what the heck? It was fairly secluded. They just threw off their clothes and jumped in the lake. So they were feeling kind of refreshed. So the three of them decided to pick a few berries for the 4th of July while they were enjoying their freedom. And so as they were crossing across this open area, of course, what should happen, but a group of ladies from the town came by. So they weren't able to get to their clothes in time. So the minister and the priest covered their private parts, and they ran for cover. And the rabbi covered his face, and he ran for cover too. So as the ladies had left, and after they were gone and they could get their clothes, the minister and the priest asked the rabbi why he covered his face. And the rabbi replied, I don't know about you, but in my congregation, they recognize my face. Just a little humor. Just starts off. So our theme this month in our international organization is Unchained Spirituality. The word unchained brings to mind the analogy that I use in the beginning spirituality class about training the baby elephant. And for those of you who've taken the classes, this is going to be a little bit familiar to you, but for those of you who haven't, this is what I teach. So it's interesting to note that when a trainer begins to work with a baby elephant and to tame it, they tie it to a pole with a rope. And for a baby elephant, it takes a pretty small rope to restrain it. And the rope is a certain length, and over time, the elephant learns that exactly how long the rope is. And the elephant will go to the end of the rope, and it won't go any further, it won't pull anymore, it'll stop pulling on the rope. So pretty soon, they're able to untie the rope from the pole, and the elephant will still just stay in that area around the pole, the same distance. If it's well trained, the unchained or untied elephant won't move from wherever the trainer puts it. It doesn't even have to have a pole. It'll just stay pretty much where the trainer puts it. See, the elephant is born with a free mind and a free spirit. But it's trained to stay put and keep itself in place so that the trainers can go about doing their life and not have to worry what the elephant's going to do. And while that's a sad example, it's actually how we all live our lives. I believe we spend our entire lives learning to stop being pole dancers. I do. In our book club, for the past several weeks, we've also been discussing this idea of becoming untamed. Glennon Doyle explores this idea that society has tamed us through the training process. We're taught to ignore our inner wisdom, our inner intuition, and instead just go along with the expectations and the rules that were given to us by our trainers. See, when we're young, we're taught that some things are possible for us and some things are impossible for us. You know, in this country, we are taught that we have freedom. We are. But we're also taught the limits on that freedom. We're actually taught what is valuable and what is to be sought after in life. And we're taught what is acceptable for someone like us and what's unacceptable for people like us. And we pick up pretty quickly what the limits are based on the messages that our parents and our teachers and the people around us give us, what the world in general gives us. And some of us are taught that the world of possibility is quite small, literally, quite small. So I want to take travel as a pretty neutral example. All right, so what were you taught about traveling when you were young? You know, did you get the message that travel is very expensive and mostly out of reach? How about messages that unfamiliar places are dangerous? Were you encouraged to travel with other friends and families, or just with certain people? And perhaps you were taught quite the opposite. Perhaps you were taught things like the world is meant to be explored, and saving money for a trip is the very best investment you can make. And maybe the adults in your life were sending you postcards from exotic places or faraway places. Or did you just read about some other kind of people that did those types of trips? I think many young, adventure-seeking, craving kids and teenagers are kind of shamed for their desire to go someplace else and explore new horizons. There's a subtle or not so subtle message about abandoning what everyone has decided is home base and good enough. Here is a startling statistic that I found. It's startling to me. 11% of Americans, this is going to kill you, 11% of Americans have never traveled outside the state in which they were born. They haven't traveled outside the state boundary in which they were born. 11%, that's more than 1 in 10. And 58.5%, nearly 6 in 10, still live in the state they were born in. Compared to them, I think I'm just a nomad. I'm just like a nomad. Many of you know that I made it my goal to be in all 50 states by the time I turned 50. I just squeaked in under the wire, visiting my last 2 states, North Dakota and South Dakota, just a few months before my 50th birthday. But I've lived in 8 different states. You know, I was definitely taught that there was value in travel. But what about you? My guess is that you can identify the message you received about traveling and have internalized those messages and live similarly to the way you were raised. Maybe not this group, because we're kind of all rebels, but most of us are really kind of trained. And maybe your internal baby elephant had a long mental rope about traveling, and you've been places far and wide, or maybe you had a very short mental rope and have kept yourself pretty close to home base. There are no huge moral or emotional impacts from what our experience with travel is. That's why I use it as an example. You know, we all get along pretty well whether we travel or we don't travel. You know, our core sense of freedom is probably not impacted too much by what we were trained about that. But the topics are endless when it comes to how long our ropes are. And some of those, the lengths of our ropes have huge impacts to our sense of freedom and the quality of our lives. We have mental ropes about relationships and careers and equality of every kind. We have mental ropes about family structures, where we can live, money, education, gender roles, power availability, and the list just goes on and on about what we were trained. And basically any topic on the human level lends itself to examining our ropes and the ways that we are limited by them. If we're going to get off the pole, so to speak, we've got to seek greater freedom. So this topic of unchained spirituality is very timely for us as we talk about the concept of freedom this weekend. So yesterday, we celebrated Independence Day, and most of us, as I said, probably celebrated in ways that felt very different from year to year, but we're just not feeling the same things that we did before. But underneath our desire for things to feel normal and our desire to go about with our traditions and the usual ways of doing things, there's this underlying concern about making sure that whatever we do is safe and responsible, and it kind of strikes the tone for this current climate that we're living in. But nonetheless, I hope some of you had some kind of a 4th of July moment, right? Because this is the time when it's really important for us to look at the concept of freedom. And when we look at the spiritual truth of freedom, we know that it is the birthright of every living soul. Randy brought that up in announcements, and Susan talked about it a little bit in her reading too. So Ernest Holmes says it this way: The divine plan is one of freedom. And he capitalizes F because it's a quality of God. The divine plan is one of freedom. The inherent nature of man is ever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom because freedom is the birthright of every living soul. Ernest Holmes. Science of Mind specifically teaches a lot about freedom and has opened me up to understand freedom in a bigger way. My talk title today is Let Freedom Ring. And that phrase, let freedom ring, implies that freedom is always in existence and it's always present. And our part is simply to let it ring, to let it echo, to let it be. But in order to let freedom ring in our lives, most of us must dig it out of our subconscious and dust it off a little bit. We've got to allow ourselves to know that we deserve to be free and untamed. As spiritual beings, we are free. We are, it's our birthright. But as human beings, most of us are far from free. Our souls are free because they're guided by this internal knowing of what is good and what is right and what is whole and loving. Our souls know that, but our human selves are typically not free because we're taught to look outside of our souls, outside of ourselves, for the rightness of a thing. You know, we need to know what the government thinks of an idea. We need to know what the law says. We need to know what our family thinks. We need to know what our friends will approve or accept, and we need to know what our employer will allow, or what religion has taught us about anything, the rightness and the wrongness of a thing. Because our human selves are tamed by all of those messages. Unchained spirituality means that we return to our inner knowing of what is right for me. And what is right under spiritual law is what honors and affirms life and freedom and what is in alignment with the truth of oneness. Let spiritual freedom ring because in the truth of oneness, that same freedom belongs to everyone, to all sentient beings. What freedom means, in my opinion, is that each of us has the freedom to comply with and obey our taming, our training, our ropes of limitation, or to challenge the ways in which we've been limited and stretch out in our personal life. Stretch out into a life that reflects the knowing that we are free. And when we free ourselves in the truth of oneness, we are freeing everyone else 1 degree at a time. What I know is that when we rise out of this idea that we're not living freely, when we come into that knowing, there arises in us a discontent. We get restless. We pace around inside the cage or at the end of our rope. We start pacing. We question the necessity of a rule or a limitation. We protest the presence of a fence or a wall or a law or the arbitrary rule about something. We refuse to eat the crumbs that are dropped inside the cage that we are in because they're trying to keep us satisfied with this limitation. We refuse. And more, as I realize that I am somehow allowed outside of the cage because of whatever privilege I have, I realize there are others still inside the cage. And so more and more, I start pacing outside the cage, questioning the validity of the cage and challenging my own need to have anyone else inside such a limitation. That is our work. Once I discovered spirituality and freedom, and I realized I could have it in my own mind and soul and life, I wanted to share this freedom with everyone trapped inside these thought structures and unnecessary ropes that were limiting. Once I realized I could step beyond the parameter of living as my training rope had held me tight, I started calling out to others, hey, there's no rope. There's no rope. Keep walking and you'll discover that you're actually free. Once I realized I was free to think something more true, I began pointing out false beliefs that were imprisoning others to as many people as possible. I'm like, you don't have to believe that. That's not true. As I got happier and more peaceful and grateful, people around me began to ask, what are you doing? What are you doing differently? Once I started talking about unfamiliar spirituality and truth and limitlessness, I realized I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to explain it. And when I realized quickly that the mental ropes of education and training and religion and upbringing are there, I realized that they're not easily abandoned. I realized that many, many, many people would rather stay comfortable in the approval that they have in their communities and in their families and their circumstances and their churches. They'd rather stay comfortable than challenge the thinking and the training to get themselves free. Many people would rather sit next to the pole and see themselves as victims of circumstances or powerless to change rather than try to break free into greater possibility. If we're going to let freedom ring in our lives, I believe spirituality is the path to greater freedom. And I want to share why I believe spirituality is our key to freedom. Number one, spirituality is based in oneness. This means freedom for me equals freedom for all. Goodness for me is goodness for the greater whole. When I am free, when I free myself from the trappings of victimizing situations, I am freeing everyone else from that same situation in my mind, and therefore it impacts the greater whole. Rosa Parks once said, "I would like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free, so other people would also be free." If I understand oneness, I realize that any idea that anyone is less than anyone else is wrong. If I truly embrace the reality that the God in me is the same God in you, then every difference on the human level is no longer limiting my love and value of anyone else. In oneness, I am only as free as the least free amongst us. The only person I can free is myself, and I must allow everyone else the space to free themselves in the realm of my influence. The question becomes, is every human being free within my hula hoop, within my realm of influence? The hula hoop is your space, is your life, is your realm of influence. What happens in there is 100% your responsibility. So is everyone inside your hula hoop free? The implicit truth of oneness is the idea that with freedom comes great responsibility. Oneness means that I can be free to do any number of things. But just because I can do a thing doesn't mean it is the responsible thing to do. Our responsibility is not only to ourselves, but to the good of all. So spirituality is based in oneness, and oneness is a key to freedom. Secondly, spirituality is based in spiritual law, such as the law of circulation. You know, most of us have been taught that we must please forces outside of ourselves to gain favor, or we're taught that luck was what made a difference for some people. Ernest Holmes says, "The road to freedom lies not through mysteries or occult performances, but through the intelligent use of natural forces and laws." What he means by mysterious or occult performances is that your good does not come because you take communion every week, or you stuff a piece of paper into a wall, or you light a certain candle, or you cross yourself or cross your fingers, or avoid black cats. He's saying that's not what it is. Our freedom comes from understanding the laws of nature and the laws of spirit. So the law of circulation is one of those. And if we look at that, we go back to the hula hoop. When I forgive others, I am forgiven. Forgiveness is the absolute basis of freedom. Lack of forgiveness is the cage of victimhood. Forgive everything. Non-forgiveness is one of the greatest thieves of our personal freedom. Forgive everything. Nothing is worth your freedom. Release yourself from any seeming mistake that you've made. Walk away from the pull of your prior experiences. If we're living by the law of circulation, we understand that we're absolutely free to choose whatever vibration to send out into the world, and we're free to refuse to absorb that lower vibration from coming at us from anyone else. Freedom comes to us through learning about the spiritual laws and learning how to live in alignment with them. Number 3, spirituality is based on internal wisdom. Some of our biggest limitations have been built by authority figures outside of ourselves. So many of us were taught that the answers to life's biggest questions were written in books thousands of years ago. Spirituality returns you to yourself, to the God within, to this now moment. I say it all the time. I will never tell you what to think. I'm going to encourage you to think, but I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm not attached to what you choose, but I want you to choose with your eyes wide open, not choosing by default. So spirituality turns you back within yourself. No one knows your answers but you. Everyone is going to pretend to know what's best for you, but only you truly know. Look inside yourself for the truest answer. Look inside yourself for the most loving answer. Look inside yourself for the answer that grants you and everyone else the greatest freedom. And lastly, number 4, spirituality is based on living in this moment. When we live in this moment, and this moment only, we're free to co-create our experience of whatever is happening in this moment. We're free to choose our perspective and our attitude and our reaction or our response to whatever's happening. We're free to walk away from anything happening in this moment. Or free to stay and lend our positive energy to a situation. We can be a force for good in the world, moment by moment. So through spirituality, we can have a bigger part of the great revolution towards freedom. We can play that bigger part. John F. Kennedy said this, the great revolution in the history of man, past, present, and future, is the revolution of those determined to be free. Let us be determined to be free. I want to close with some of the lyrics of the next song that Bonnie's going to sing. It's called Living in the Moment. It's written by Jason Mraz, who is a wonderful poet. He says, if this life is one act, why do we lay all these traps? We put them right in our path when we just want to be free. I will not waste my days making up all kinds of ways to worry about all the things that will not happen to me. So I just let go of what I know I don't know. And I know I only do this by living in the moment, living my life, easy and breezy, with peace in my mind, peace in my heart, peace in my soul. So let's choose to live freely in this moment and every moment. We must become free in ourselves before we can allow freedom to truly ring in our lives. We cannot give what we do not have in our own self. Our divinity and our connection to God is shared by everyone in the world. Take some time today to review the thoughts and beliefs around freedom. Check the length of your ropes and realize they are tied to nothing. There is no pull. You are spiritually as free as you understand yourself to be. So let freedom ring.